Hello and welcome to another episode of Autogefühl, today with me, AJ. Today you join me in Hockenheimring with the new 718 Spyder. I drove this last year in Scotland, but that time I drove it in the manual, but now the 718 Spyder comes with the PDK. Let's check out what it's capable of. The 718 Spyder is 1.8 meters wide, it's 4.4 meters long, and it weighs about 1,500 kilograms. But of course, unlike the 911, because of the mid-engine, it has a much better 50-50 weight distribution. Here in the 718 Spyder, well, first of all, you have the Spyder logo down here in the lower part of the bumper, which helps it stand out from the rest of the 718s. I also like these aerodynamic channels. Of course, this is also a lot of aerodynamics has been upgraded, and they pay attention to that here in the 718 Spyder. I also like these headlamps, of course, with LED, and I also like the air channels and the vents here right on top in front of the bonnet. Here we see some more channels for that really sophisticated aerodynamics. Of course, in the GT4 you have a big wing and that adds a lot of downforce, but overall the sophisticated aerodynamics also helps reduce drag. You can see here you also get the optional ceramic composite brakes, so the brake rotors itself, but you also have 6-piston calipers in the front and 4-piston calipers in the rear. I really like these 20-inch wheels, very classic with this gunmetal gray color. Very classic Porsche, but looks very elegant nonetheless. As we go along the side, as you'll see, very simple design lines, just one line over here, a very mild crease which fades away in the front. And this being the Spyder and not the Boxster GTS, we have the manually retractable soft top, which also has an additional kind of opening right over here. And of course, the back is also quite different. We have these very sexy looking haunches in the rear. We'll take a closer look at this later on. Of course, this being the 718, the engine is in the middle, the 4-liter naturally aspirated Boxer, and so we have more channels over there. But overall, it still looks like a 718, and that's no bad thing, right? A really sexy backside, wouldn't you say? You can see the haunches on the rear a little bit more prominently from this angle. In fact, the whole car seems a lot more hunkered down. In fact, the chassis is lowered by 30 millimeters. I also really like this large diffuser here in the rear with the sports exhaust, which really help you enjoy that naturally aspirated 4-liter Boxster 6. But to meet the Euro 6 detemp regulations of emissions, they also have particulate filters. In fact, the engine can also shut off individual banks and alternate between them every 20 seconds. Pretty interesting, but you got to do what you got to do to meet these regulations and still keep making high-performance, naturally aspirated petrol engines. So, nevertheless, they sound really great. Also helps in aerodynamics and downforce. So does the spoiler here at the rear. Some really interesting badging, Porsche 718 Spyder, and very sleek tail lamps as well. Nestled here is the new 4-liter, 6-cylinder, naturally aspirated petrol Boxer engine, which powers the 718 Spyder. It makes 420 PS or metric horsepower and 430 Newton meters of torque here with the PDK. That's 10 Newton meters more than the manual, and that's because this dual clutch transmission can handle a higher amount of torque. This means that it can accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in half a second faster at 3.9 seconds. And in fact, the gear ratios are a lot shorter in the lower numbers. So 1, 2, 3 especially are a lot shorter than the ones you get in the manual transmission, which, well, it would have been nice to have shorter gearing in the manual so you can play around with the nice shifter a lot more. But nevertheless, here it enables a seamless acceleration. So let's put that to the test and take it out on the racetrack soon. Unlike the Boxster, here in the Spyder you have to retract the roof manually. So step 1, get inside, press the little latch here, this tab. The window is lower and this hook undoes itself. Next, you gotta get up, you gotta go over here, and you gotta remove these side flaps. There's a little button, you gotta feel for it in here. These come out. There's an arrow here and an arrow there. You line those up, that clicks. Same procedure here on the other side. And line those arrows up. those click. Then the roof itself is now open, so you do that, it opens up, and then you go back around here, and then you manually retract the roof, close the back, preferably from this side, push it down, it clicks, and you're not done yet. You still have these two flaps, one on this side and one on that side, that you have to put back down. And to lift it back up, same procedure in reverse. Open the trunk here. Anyway, while we're at it, you can also see over here, you do see that there is a little bit of loading area. Enough space to throw a couple rucksacks in, maybe just about one small suitcase. And there's of course space in the front as well. But same procedure in reverse. Push this back down, lock it. Then I go over here, redo this, click, over here again. So if it's raining outside, you're probably gonna get completely soaked by the time you're done with this. Make sure this is pressed down, and then finally use this to retract or affix the roof again, and the windows go up and the roof is back up again. In addition to the trunk in the back, you also have a frunk in the front. This is quite cavernous, what you see here, so plenty of space to put more suitcases, and this is one of the reasons why the 718 still remains a fairly usable sports car. Here we have the key fob, very traditional, nothing new. The door handle swings upwards, the window scrolls down a little bit to make opening the door that much easier. I also really like the build quality and the materials used. They're very top notch, not even a millimeter of play, really tight tolerances. You obviously get leather with Alcantara, but next year you will also have the race text, the race derived textile. And as often as possible, it's good to have animal-free interiors, but nice, soft, padded elbow rest over here, a little strap here to unlock the door, some additional storage over here, as well as up here. But of course, I really like this dash of yellow all throughout the interior of the car, which is the same yellow as the exterior color. So it really brings the outside in, makes you feel connected with the car. Let's take a seat inside. Of course, this being a low-slung sports car, you do have to stoop down quite a bit. Nice place to keep the key, or rather you have to insert the key. These bucket seats, first of all, you have to make sure you climb over this to get inside, but once you're inside, you have the perfect driving position, really low down, really connected with the center of gravity of the car. These bucket seats really hold you in place. They're really great side bolstering, really nice contour, and of course lightweight carbon fiber Spyder badging on the top. Side airbags as well, so really sophisticated seats. Continuing with that great driving position is this gorgeous GT steering wheel with Alcantara. I mean, Porsche, I think, makes some of the best steering, and the steering wheel itself is a big part of that control interface, that engagement that you get as a driver. And of course, being the PDK now, you have the paddle shifters, which are nice metal. They have a nice damped sound. They have cold feel. I mean, when you touch them, they're cold because they're metal, so I always like that. The traditional tripod cluster with the tack, the speedo, and a screen which you can use to toggle through different settings, but overall a really nice dashboard. One of my favorite things about the interior of the 718 are these cup holders. You can retract them like this and still close the flap. See how they have this little bit of gap here, and when you put your drink here, it gets cooled by the air vent. So Smart engineering, which is something I always appreciate. Alcantara materials here, nice spacious glove box with a USB socket, soft touch materials on the dashboard, the chrono pack, which you can, as you see, use the chrono right there. It's always nice to see an analog. Reset that over there, and otherwise it just shows the time. So pretty cool, very quick. I think a lot of people will still appreciate the fact that you have so many buttons as well. So even all the shortcuts down here for your media, for the nav, the map, connecting to the phone, the car settings directly. So you have these hot buttons, as well as being able to, for example, if you are in the tuner, you can use this knob on the right hand side to scroll through the different channels. So really nice. And how traditional and old-fashioned is this? You actually have a CD player. Nevertheless, nice buttons, as well as buttons here for the dual zone climate control. So nice switches for toggling between the temperature, demister, air circulation, air vent control over here. Now, this being the GT series, you also have the GT shifter for the PDK. Nice feeling, it's nice to hold. The button on the top to press down and then shift into drive. Then as we go further down, here you have some of the buttons to alter the different, the sports modes. For example, you have the button here to turn the sports exhaust on, so the valves in the exhaust flaps open to make the engine sound louder, which I would always leave that on if I were you. PDK Sport, so that the gearbox has reactive and can make the best of the engine. Sport suspension in terms of the damping, the active dampers to make that stiffer. And you actually have, well, again, you have engine start-stop, which might seem a bit funny, but again, it's all about those emission regulations. And a cigarette lighter. Pretty cool. The instruments of the 718 I think are a great combination of retro and modern. So you have things like Apple CarPlay, but at the same time you have things like a CD player. And that continues here to the instrumentation. So you have a large TAC that takes center stage right in the middle, a speedo on the left, with some displays as well, which shows you some interesting information that's very useful, like the speed and the trip. But on the right-hand side, you have a screen. So here you have things like the vehicle information regarding oil and different settings. You also have your audio connection, a mini map as well. You can even set the navigation, and you have some interesting information for your trip meter. There's also some additional systems like TPMS, which you can see what's happening with updates regarding that. The chrono that we saw, which has the actual analog chrono on the dash, you can also see that duplicated here, and some other performance-related metrics like G-force and a performance torque curve. All right, let's take the 718 GT4 out for a couple hot laps on this handling course. It's a very tight course, so it's not going to be very high speed, and the conditions today on the track are really quite treacherous, very slippery conditions. But here as well, the handling characteristic of the 718 becomes more evident, where you have that mid-engine, so if you lose control, it starts twitching and swinging. But nevertheless, it's still a bit more balanced than the 911. And with the PDK, even in the Spyder and the GT4, it's the same engine and transmission, so the same powertrain and drivetrain. The PDK has the shorter gearing in the first few ratios, so which means that you can still play between in second and third gear and not have to keep it in second gear the whole time like we had to do back with the manual. The steering as well, I really like this Alcantara grip. It's very nice to hold, and you hear the engine a lot louder. That 4-liter naturally aspirated Boxer 6 is quite loud here. Of course, even here in the coupe, even though we have a little bit better sound deadening thanks to that hard top, the engine is right behind your head. In the 911, the engine is a little bit further behind, and you have that extra rear seat, so while you hear it, it's not as evident and prominent as it is here in the 718. But yeah, with the PDK, the shifts are lightning quick. So on a faster stretch, you don't have to worry about any gaps in acceleration. It's a very seamless acceleration. I have the suspension in PDK Sport, the suspension in stiff mode, the PDK in Sport, but it is shifting up a bit too early for my taste. So right now it's in third gear, again because of that slightly closer ratios. It tends to shift up maybe a little bit earlier, but you have the paddle shifters to take control for yourself. This is the kind of, the tricky situation with the 718 is it's a bit more of a track car, so it kind of makes more sense to have the PDK, but at the same time, for me, Porsches, as much as they're about top speed and track records, they're also about pure driver engagement. And I'm missing that. I'm missing that manual shift here in this 718 because I have that gorgeous 4-liter naturally aspirated flat 6, but the manual somehow in the 718 GT4 and Spyder, it's a bit, the ratios are not suited for everyday driving or out in the real world. It's more, again, more track focused, and that too for slightly wider, longer tracks, not for narrow tracks and technical tracks like this where you really can't open up the engine. But it's one of those cars which just wraps around you. It becomes telepathic. The steering is really just, you look in the direction you want to go, you feel that in you, and then it just does it. It's so telepathic, it's so intuitive. The brake pedal feel, the throttle response. The power delivery is also very linear thanks to this naturally aspirated engine. You have torque, you have plenty of torque, but it's not as much as the 911 turbo, of course. And the way the power comes on is very linear, so you're always in control. This weight distribution really helps in tight, narrow tracks such as this. But let's take it out on some winding roads and through the city as well to see how the 718 fares outside. Here we are in the Spyder, and we're going to go through a little village before we get out onto one of my favorite sections of twisty mountain roads. So let's kind of talk a little bit about how the Spyder is to live with if you were to consider this as a everyday sports car. First of all, I've driven this car for a couple days last year already when it was released with the manual transmission, if you guys remember. And even then, this is a GT, and therefore it is a little bit more track focused. So even with the sports suspension turned off, it is quite bumpy. You feel everything, all the edges are filtering into your seat. So it's not comfortable. That being said though, the seats are actually very supportive. So you fit very snug, so it fits like a glove. And while the padding itself might not be that plush, it doesn't really hurt after a long time in the seat. So I think it's actually surprisingly comfortable. The visibility, again, here in the Spyder is not that great because of that top, the soft top. Speaking of which, the soft top is very lightweight and it doesn't do a good job of sound insulation, not at all. In fact, if you're on the Autobahn and there's cars passing you and there's rain like there is now, it feels almost like the windows are open because you can hear so much of that. I also wish the technology was a little bit better, a little bit more upgraded now for this model year at least. And I do like the fact that there are only 3 clocks, which means I can see all 3 of them really well, as compared to say the 911 Turbo, which has the 5, and I can't really see where they are. But yeah, it's much better than that in terms of visibility, but it's still, the graphics are not that sharp and there aren't so many different options. You have regular cruise control, but no, other kind of semi-autonomous driving, which, to be honest, is not what this car is meant for. Your money is going elsewhere. It's going to that engine. Speaking of which, driving with a light foot through country roads, I've been able to manage 10.5 liters for 100 kilometers, if you're interested in that kind of a thing. If not, well, look what we have here, a beautiful winding road. So let's turn the PDK to sport. Let's turn the loud exhaust mode on. I'm going to keep the suspension in soft mode because this is a very rough, bumpy road, not a track. So I would rather have a little bit more compliant suspension so that the wheels are more in contact with the ground. I'm going to be very easy on the throttle because the surface is very wet, and being a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car, it's very twitchy. If you lose a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car, you lose it. It's really hard to control, and I'm not Walter Roll. I'm not going to be able to catch it. So I'm going to take it easy, but that engine is really the gem. It's the highlight of this car. The handling and the chassis, of course, but naturally aspirated 4-liter Boxer 6 engine. You just got to ease it in. The power delivery is so linear. So while the little boy in my head says floor it in the mid corner, I know that if I do, it's just going to spin around on me. So I have a very gentle application with the throttle, and it responds. It's very telepathic. What I do with my right leg is exactly what the engine does. And again, thanks to these shorter gear ratios, you actually have the ability to actually go from second to third if you wanted to. And the PDK means there is no interruption in the acceleration. Steering, as always, with Porsche sports cars at least, is impeccable. You feel everything. It's like you're running your hand on the surface of the road, and it's such direct feedback. It's a very quick rack, but at the same time, at center, it's very composed, so it never feels twitchy. The twitchiness only comes from the bumpy, stiff suspension, but the steering wheel never gives you any kind of wavering kind of a feedback. It's very consistent. It's very sure-footed. I am on street sport tires, but there's a lot of dead leaves on the street and a lot of water. So, fortunately, as much as I want to floor it right now, it's gonna lose traction. And that's where, you know, this also has the upgraded LSD. So the limited slip differential is a little bit more improved than what you get in the manual transmission. Because of this double clutch system, there's a little bit more torque, so you're up to 430 Newton meters as compared to 420 that is there in the manual. But brake feel, fantastic. Really great bite, really great feedback. So yeah, the brake feel, the steering wheel pedal, the steering wheel weight, the throttle pedal, all of these give a very nice communication of what the car is doing, what the tires are doing, what the road surface is like. And that sound. All the way to redline, 7,500 RPM at least. It just sounds glorious. But you know, one thing that I'm missing, I'm starting to miss that manual. As much as I said the ratios were too high, which is true, I really wish that this gorgeous naturally aspirated 4-liter Boxer 6 was mated to a nice short shifting 6-speed manual. And that's something that, I don't know, maybe eventually we'll get a GT with a shorter ratio 6-speed manual, which is, I think, would be the best combination. But the acceleration is instantaneous. And this is a little bit smaller than the 911 Turbo, for example, which means that it's a little bit more manageable on narrow winding roads like this. You have a little bit more space to play within the road, especially if there's going to be, if it's a two-way road, you know, you want to be able to make a quick correction if there's oncoming traffic. So this feels a little bit more easy to handle and manage. But because of that low center of gravity and low seating position and very low profile of the car, visibility in general is not as nice as its bigger brother. But it really is so telepathic to control. very tight turning circle as well, even though this doesn't have a rear axle steering system. Very free revving engine. And yeah, on these bumpy streets, which is what you're going to find in the real world, the suspension actually is okay. It makes sense now. Again, without turning on that sport mode, because if you do, it becomes too jarring, and I'm always a little bit concerned that if I hit a bump a little bit too hard, then the wheel's going to go off the ground and then I lose traction. But is it something that you can live with on a day-to-day basis, like the 911s? Maybe not so much. Again, a GT car, any GT car, even a 911 GT, any of the GT series there, would also not be the most usable car for every day. But the PDK just takes the 718 to another level in terms of acceleration, but maybe not so much in terms of driver engagement. But if you want that convenience and you really care about 0 to 60 or 0 to 100 kilometers per hour, then maybe the PDK is the right version for you. Let's summarize today's episode of the Porsche 718 GT4 and the Spyder, now with the PDK double clutch transmission. First of all, the PDK commands about a €3,000 premium over the manual transmission. So now you're looking at something around €97,000. But you know how it is with options. Realistically, these are around 100,000. So what did I like and what did I not like? Well, first of all, you have to love that naturally aspirated engine. It just makes the whole experience so much more visceral, so much more raw. And that brings me to the next point. Coupled with the PDK, it actually gets the best out of this engine. In fact, you can even get a little bit more torque. This is up by 10 Newton meters over the manual. So you have seamless acceleration. And that really complements this GT4's characteristic because it's a lot more race focused. It feels like a boy racer. Whereas with the Spyder, I see this more as a car that I want to enjoy on winding roads with the roof down in the summer. And for that, I think the manual would be a little bit better if only the manual's gear ratios were not so tall. Ultimately, I think it really comes down to what you want. Do you want a track toy? Then the GT4, now with the new engine and the PDK, is a phenomenal car. It's engaging enough because you're constantly going to be working at the wheel and trying to get the best out of it, and the paddle shifters work really great. But if you're looking at something to enjoy winding roads with somebody sitting next to you, or maybe going for a nice little drive out on the weekend, but you want that naturally aspirated petrol engine and you want a manual, I don't know if this is going to be the best option for you there. That's just my opinion. But ultimately, these are phenomenal cars to have fun with. What I didn't like so much, for example, would be the fact that they didn't really upgrade the technology so much. I wish there was a little bit more better touchscreen infotainment system. I wish the graphics were a little bit better. I wish the rear view camera was standard on the Spyder, because without it you really can't see anything. And I wish those kinds of assistance systems were also available, just because it would make it a lot more usable. And that brings me to the last point. 718s don't have the rear seats, and with these GT models the suspension is very firm, so that's something you have to keep in mind. So ultimately, for me, it would be the GT4 that makes the most sense and is the pick of the range. What do you guys think? Let me know, put it down in the comments below.